Okay, good morning. Allow me to discuss yung for 2 days na wala ako for the accounting for factory overhead. We have already discussed the American authors. Ngayon naman, gamitin naman natin yung Filipino author. Okay? So, allow me to discuss accounting for factory overhead and our learning objectives, although the rest of it are already discussed dun sa first materials natin. Ito pero yung mga gusto pa rin nating idagdag dito sa materials po natin for today. Okay? So, our learning objectives upon of the end of this chapter, you should be able to compute for the factory overhead rate using the different bases, apply the concept of actual factory overhead and apply factory overhead, identify the computation of different methods of allocating budgeted service department costs to producing department costs. And then, syempre lastly, compute the basic overhead variance. Although, yung variance analysis natin nasa managerial accounting naman na yan. Okay? So, remember, all costs incurred in the factory that are not direct materials or direct labor are generally termed as factory overhead. Yun yung pinakasimple nating definition. So, one method of determining whether a factory expenditure is a factory overhead item is to compare it to the classification standard established for direct materials and direct labor costs. That is, if the expenditure cannot be charged to either one of these two direct factory accounts, it is classified as factory overhead. So, para siyang, napaka-simple lang. Check mo kung whether it is classified as direct materials or direct labor. Pag hindi, automatic factory overhead. Kumbaga, trash bin siya, no? Basta hindi siya pumasok dun sa definition ng direct materials and direct labor, factory overhead siya. So, factory overhead refers to the cost pool used to accumulate all indirect manufacturing costs. Examples are as follows. We have indirect materials and indirect labor, heat, light, and power for the factory, rent on the factory building, depreciation on the factory building and factory equipment, maintenance of factory building and factory equipment. So these are but not limited to the examples of factory overhead. Okay, next. Factory overhead costs are divided into three categories on the basis of their behavior in relation to the production. So, ito yung mga na-discuss na natin dati. We have the variable, we have the fixed, and the mixed overhead. So, when we say variable factory overhead costs, these are the factory overhead costs that vary in direct proportion to the level of production within the relevant range. So, variable cost per unit as a characteristic remains constant as production either increases or decreases. Total variable cost varies naman in direct proportion to the production. That is, the greater the number of units produced, the higher the total variable cost. I hope naalala niyo yung characteristic na ito. No? Fixed siya on a per unit basis, but in total, it varies directly the to the X yung or from unit yung gagamitin po natin. Okay, sa unit of productions. Okay. Next, fixed factory overhead. These are the factory overhead costs that remain constant within the relevant range regardless of varying levels of production. The total cost remains constant, but the fixed cost per unit varies indirectly with the production. And that is, the greater the number of units produced, the lower the fixed cost per unit. And we might say that this is an advantage of mass production. Kasi the more we produce, the lesser the manufacturing cost per unit. Diba? Pero kung kukonti, hindi mo mababawi. So that's one of the idea pagdating sa fixed factory overhead. Para mabawi mo siya, dapat madami yung mapoproduce mo. And then we have the mix. The mixed factory overhead. These factory overhead costs are either wholly fixed nor wholly variable in nature, but have the characteristics of both. Mixed factory overhead costs must ultimately be separated into their fixed and variable components for purposes of planning and control. And nagawa na natin siya. Some of the notable na discussions natin, kung malala niyo po, we have the observation method, the engineering method, the high-low method, and syempre yung favorite nating lahat, yung regression analysis. Simple regression analysis. Yun yung ginagamit natin to separate the fixed and variable costs. Mas madali siya. Okay. And syempre, yung magiging ano natin doon, final output is the cost equation. I hope yung cost equation alam nyo pa rin pong gawin. No? Alam nyo ibig sabihin ng mga yan. And syempre, to prepare. Next, ito na yung pinakasimple actually to, pero habang ang nangyayari, tumatagal or hahaba. Kasi nga, hindi, basta ako. Hindi, joke lang. Maganda siya. Simplified siya. Kaya lang parang ang hirap mong intindihin kasi mahaba yung babasahin mo. Pero ito, yung next topic natin, napakasimple lang ito. Okay? So, budgeting factory overhead costs. So, budgets are management operating plans expressed in quantitative terms such as units of productions and related costs. After factory overhead costs have been classified as either fixed or variable, so wala tayong mix kasi kailangan alam mo kung ano yung fixed and ano yung variable. Excuse me. Budgets can be prepared excuse me, for expected level of production. So the separation of the fixed and variable cost components permits the company to prepare flexible budget. Wait lang, excuse lang. Nasaan ba yung boss nito? Okay. So di masyadong familiar din sa ating bago OBS. Excuse me, one second. So factors to be considered in the computation of the overhead are as follows. We have base to be used. Pwede natin gamitin physical output, direct material cost, direct labor cost, direct labor hours, and machine hours. Ito. Actually, ito lang yung nagiging denominator natin. Okay? And then we have the activity level to be used, whether it is normal capacity or expected actual capacity. And then the inclusion or the exclusion of fixed factory overhead, whether we're going to use full, okay, yung absorption costing, ito yung ginagamit natin for cost accounting. And then we have the direct costing method used for internal reporting or managerial advisory services. So sa mas nyo na ito makikita. Okay? And then the use of a single rate or several rates. So, gagamitin natin dito sa discussions natin are plant-wide rate or blanket rate or one rate for all producing departments. And then we have departmentalized rate wherein one rate for the producing department. So, let's check natin yan. So, base to be used. No? The base to be used should be related to the functions represented by the overhead cost being applied. If factory overhead is labor-oriented, the most appropriate base to use is the direct labor hours or direct labor cost. Kasi labor-oriented siya. Ano yung mga yan? Mga workshop yung mga yan. Yung mga workshop natin na gawang kamay, like halimbawa furniture shop, hindi naman masyadong gumagamit ng machineries yun. So, in order to allocate yung overhead na na-incur natin dun sa product we use, mga labor-oriented such as labor hours or the direct labor cost. If the factory daw is investment-oriented, related to operation of machinery, maraming machines, hindi mo gagamitin yung direct labor hours kasi hindi naman machine yung hindi naman gawang kamay yung mas ginagamit. Wait, it's machine. Then the most appropriate base daw po will be the machine hours. On the other hand, if the factory overhead is material-oriented, then material cost might be considered as the most appropriate base. So the simplest of all bases is physical output or units of production. So ibig sabihin, kung i-allocate mo siya, pinakamadali sa lahat is gamitin mo yung ilan yung na-produce mo. Okay, yun ang ibig sabihin. Kung ilan yung na-produce mo. So, direct labor hours, once again, this is the most commonly used base or denominator in the computation of a predetermined factory overhead rate. The number of direct labor hours is spread for particular is readily available for the payroll sheet. Kukunin mo na lang. So, this base should be used if it can establish that there is a direct relationship between factory overhead and direct labor hours. Although, yan, sinasabi mostly ng mga problem pag na-encounter nyo sa job order costing system, overhead is 80% of direct labor cost or direct labor hours. Yan, sinasabi naman nyo ng agad. Kasi siya yung pinakamadali. Okay? And if yun yung nakita mo, then it's good. It's maganda. Kaya, pagkukumpitin natin paano, it may be used with great disparity with hourly rate wages. So, the formula, ang gagamitin daw is labor hours. Kapag may problema din sa hourly rate, magkakaiba yung pasahod natin. So, gamitin natin yung direct labor hours. The formula is expressed as the factory overhead rate or the predetermined factory overhead rate is equal to the estimated factory overhead or total estimated factory overhead, okay, divided by estimated direct labor hours. Yung makukuha mo dito na rate is peso sign, siyempre, no? Peso or factory overhead per direct labor hours. Yun lang yan. Then we have the direct labor cost. Method, it is recommended if it can establish that there are direct relationship between cost and the factory overhead, just like the direct labor hours. Yan. So the direct labor cost is readily available on the payroll sheet. So labor rates do not change as often as material costs. So this base is more reliable than material costs. So this base should not be used if there is a little relationship between cost and the factory overhead. For example, if the overhead is composed largely of depreciation and equipment related costs, then wag mo siyang gamitin. Okay? Then the formula is simply predetermined factory overhead rate is equal to estimated factory overhead. This is actually cost, no? Factory overhead cost yan, divided by direct labor cost. So, peso divided by peso, no? Multiply natin ng 100 para makompute natin yung percentage or yung rate in percentage. Okay? Next, machine hours. Ganun ulit. Appropriate daw siya when a direct relationship between factory overhead and cost and machine hours. So this may occur in companies or departments that are largely automated so that the majority of the factory overhead costs consists of depreciation on the factory equipment. So the additional work will be required because each machine will have a time record to summarize the total machine hours used for each job. So the formula is factory overhead rate is equal to estimated factory overhead. Again, it is cost divided by estimated machine hours. Ang makukompute mo dito is peso or factory overhead per peso, factory overhead per machine hours. Okay? And then we have the direct material cost. This is appropriate daw if it can be inferred that the factory overhead costs are directly related to direct material costs, as in cases where direct materials are very large part of the total cost. So direct materials cost is not appropriate based to when more than one product is manufactured by a company. Yes, dapat single lang. The different products may require different materials and different quantities. And at that, so it will be inconvenient to use material cost as a base because we have to compute for the factory overhead rate for each product. The formula is estimated factory overhead is again cost divided by estimated direct material cost. So peso sign, lalabas is syempre point something. Multiply natin ng 100 para maging percentage. And then we have the units of production, yung pinaka-simple. No? Bakit? Kasi di-divide mo lang siya with the number of units produced. So factory overhead rate or predetermined factory overhead rate is computed as estimated factory overhead divided by estimated units of production. Okay? So, check natin yung mga pinagsasabi natin. Mahaba siya, pero sabi ko nga sa inyo, ang isipin nyo lang, ano yung denominator. Okay? So, we have the Art Round Table Company. Estimates factory overhead at 450,000. So, ito na yon for the next fiscal year. Nga pala, no? Ang kailangan nyo din palang hanapin or tandaan, dapat ang ibibigay sa inyo na factory overhead or the estimated total factory overhead should be annualized, no? For 1 year. Okay? So may mga pagkakataon na bibigyan ka nila ng bibigyan ka nila ng factory overhead per monthly. Hindi 'yun yung gagamitin mo. Okay? Hindi 'yun yung gagamitin mo. Gagawin mo, multiply mo siya ng 12 kung naka-monthly siya. Dapat yearly. Okay? Or annualized. So this is the next fiscal year for the 50,000 more. So yun na yan. It is estimated that 90,000 units will be produced at a material cost of 600,000 pesos. Conversion will require an estimated of 100 direct labor hours at a cost of 3 pesos per hour with 45,000 machine hours. So sabi niya, compute the predetermined overhead rate based on the following. Okay, try natin to. So let's copy this one. Tapos, lagay natin dito sa Excel. Paste. Can we paste it as a... Lagay natin siyang picture. Picture. So, dagdag natin siya. Para madali. And then, the requirements are material cost, units of production. So, madali lang yan. Material cost, units of production. So, let's start with letter A. Material cost. So, ang gagawin lang natin, kunin mo lang yung, this is the predetermined factory overhead rate, FOH rate na lang gawin natin, is equal to, paano natin kukumpitin to? That is, predetermined material cost, so meron tayo 450,000 dun sa taas. 450,000 divided by, divided by material cost. Magkano ba yung material cost? 600,000 multiplied by 100. Kasi rate yung kukunin natin. So, magkano to? This is 450 divided by 600 times. So, actually, dapat matatanggal yung ano dyan, yung peso sign. So, tanggalin natin. Dapat na ito. 0.75 kasi makakancel out yun. Times 100. So, yung ating material cost, okay, lalabas dito is ito yung computation, diba? So, material cost, according to material cost, ang predetermined overhead rate natin is, nagalang natin ito, 0.75 times 100, that is 75% of material cost. Yan ang ibig sabihin. So, anong ibig sabihin nun? Halimbawa, for the month of January, material cost incurred mo is, for the next fiscal year, sabi niya, material cost, for the month of January, for example, material cost incurred is 50,000. Or direct material, tama. Material cost incurred is 50,000. Ngayon, tatanungin ka, magkano yung ating applied factory overhead? Napakasimple. Oh, sabi niya kasi 75% of material cost. So, 50,000 times 0.75. Yan na yung lalabas. So, later, makikita mo, direct materials plus direct labor plus factory overhead or applied factory overhead. Multiply mo lang siya ng material cost. So, it's 75% of material cost. Okay? Next, letter B. Number of units of production. Units of production. So, napakasimple lang nito, guys. Paulit-ulit. So, copy lang natin to. So, copy lang natin yan. That's 450,000 divided by number of units lang yun. Number of units we have, yan daw, 90,000 units. Okay, so hindi siya peso. Tanggalin natin yung peso. Okay, so 90,000 units. Okay. So, anong lalabas dyan? It's 450 divided by 90. Ito ba ito sa taas? is 5 pesos per unit. Yan. 5 pesos per. Gawin natin green. So, yung mga sagot. Ganyan lang siya kadali, guys. Okay. So, ano ibig sabihin yan? Halimbawa, no, for the month of January, nakapag-produce siya ng 15,000 units. Okay. So, ano magiging applied factory overhead natin? Ganun lang ibig sabihin nun. That's 15,000 times 5 pesos. 75,000 yung applied factory overhead natin if we're going to use the units of production. Okay. Next, letter C. Okay. C is machine hours. Hindi makukuha nyo na kung sabi ko sa inyo bakit madali siya. So, machine hours, that's 450,000. Bali, ang ginagawa mo, pinapalitan mo lang is yung denominator. So, ilan yung machine hours natin dito? 45,000. So, you have 45,000 machine hours. Okay. Palitan natin ito. Okay. So, ang lalabas dyan, we have 450,000 divided by 45,000 is 10 pesos per machine hours. Okay? So, halimbawa ulit, on the month of January, ganun lang yun. The month of January, nakapag-incur yung company na, let's say, 7,000 machine hours yung ginamit nila. Ilan yung magiging applied factory overhead? Applied factory overhead will be 7,000 times 10 pesos. 70,000. Next, letter D. Okay, D is direct labor cost. Okay. Diba? Madali lang siya. Copy lang natin to. Yes, 450,000. Direct labor cost, binigay ba? Hindi. Pero kaya ba computin? Yes. There are 100,000 direct labor hours at a cost of 3 pesos per hour. So, multiply lang natin. That's 100,000 direct labor hours times 3. So, 300,000 pesos. So, anong gagawin mo lang? 450 divided by 30. 150. Okay, yung 150 is not a peso kasi makakancel out yan. So, 150. And since pareha silang peso sign, that times 100 natin. Times 100. Okay? So, ang lalabas dito is, para maging percentage, 150%. Okay? It's 150% of direct labor cost. Ang ibig sabihin. So, halimbawa, the month of January, ang direct labor cost na na-incur is, let's say, 100,000. Para simplified. Ilan yung magiging applied factory overhead mo? Madali lang. That's 100,000 times 1.5 or 150%. So, we have 150,000. Okay? Next, last is letter E. Direct labor hours. Okay. So, for the direct labor hours, copy lang natin to. 450 divided by 100,000. The 100,000 direct labor hours. So, DL. So, magkano yan? That's 450 divided by 100,000. That's 450 per DL hours. So, halimbawa, in the month of January, nakapag-incur yung company na 50. Masyado na malaki. 25,000 direct labor hours. Halimbawa lang. Magkano yung magiging applied factory overhead? Simplified. That's 25,000 times 450. 450. And another 12,000. Okay, so that's how you prepare. So, ibig sabihin guys, yung base natin ay denominator lang. Which is, yun yung gagamitin mo kapag magkakaroon na tayo ng applied. Ibig sabihin din ng applied is projected or budgeted lang din, no? Forecasted. So, hindi siya yung actual. Yun yung nilalagay natin as part of the journal entry. Pakita ko na din pag may applied, although nandun yun sa dulo ng discussion natin. Entry natin is debit to work in process inventory, credit to, ang tinuro sa inyo ni Ma'am Rose ay credit to factory overhead. Okay. Pero on the Filipino author, nilalagay niya na applied factory overhead just to have a distinction between a actual tapos yung predetermined. Okay? So, pasok natin dito. Yan yung magiging journal entry. Okay, so, access natin dito. Okay? So, yan yung journal entry. So, depende pero kung anong base yung ginamit. So, importante, anong kailangan mong gawin? Unahin, makapag-prepare ka. Allocation. Okay, next. Continue natin yung discussion. Again, the rate computed for the illustrative problem is known as the plant-wide or blanket rate. Plant-wide, bakit? Kasi isa lang. Yun lang yung gagamitin mong rate sa lahat. So, all departments in the company will use the same application rate for the factory overhead and also the same base. A single plant-wide application rate can be used when either a single product is being manufactured or when the different products are being manufactured, pass through the same series of productive departments and are charged similar amounts of applied factory overhead. Okay? Multiple departmental factory overhead application rates are preferable naman kapag meron tayong different products being manufactured and either do not pass through the same series of productive departments, or if they do, they should be charged with the similar amounts of applied factory overhead because of the different amounts of attentions each product receives. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, pwede natin gamitin yung plant-wide system or yung blanket rate for single product kasi pare-parehas lang naman sila ng ginamit, pinasok, and attention na nakuha dun sa company or dun sa factory. Pero if you're doing different products and different attentions, like for example, itong product A, handicraft siya, no? Gawang kamay, workshop, direct labor dapat ang gagamitin natin doon. The other hand, no, yung isang product mo is gumagamit ng machineries and halos lahat ng components and processes niya ay ina-attach at pinaprocess through machineries, then dapat iba yung gagamitin natin sa kanyang rate machine hours. For example, yung gagamitin natin doon. Kasi kung if ever nagagamit ka ng isa lang, na although meron kang different products and different attentions, magkakaroon tayo ng tinatawag natin distortion sa cost. Okay? Kakaroon ng distortion sa cost. Napakasimple na lang yun. Imagine mo, if we're going to use, for example, a single allocation-based na direct labor hours, what about the products na gumagamit ng machine hours? Mabibigyan ba sila or macha-chargean ba sila ng factory overhead or applied factory overhead? The answer is definitely no. Diba? Kasi wala kang pagmumultiplyan na direct labor hours sa kanila if ever na meron ka ng rate. Same is true kapag machine hours yung ginamit mo, walang mapagmumultiplyan yung gumagamit ng labor hours or direct labor hours. Okay? Next. What are the steps naman for another topic na to? Departmentalized overhead. Okay. Ayan. So, gagawin daw po, divide the company into segments called departments. Cost centers to which expenses are to be charged. Estimate the factory overhead for each department, such as direct departmental charges plus indirect departmental charges. Okay. Bigyan na lagyan ng G. And select and estimate the base to be used by each department. Allocate, syempre, yung service department cost or to the producing department and compute for the factory overhead rate similar to the computation of the blanket rate. Okay, so kanina, single rate lang. Imagine one whole company, gagawin niya lang, although maraming departments, simplified natin. For example, meron tayong cutting preparation department, cutting department, assembling department, finishing department, for example. Yung mga yun, ang gagawin nyo doon, isang rate lang yung gagamitin nyo, allocation rate. Eh, sabi nga natin, di ba, iba-iba naman yung nature ng trabaho per department. So, dapat, sabi niya, iba-iba din dapat yung gagamitin mo allocation rate. Okay? So, let's say, for example, sa preparation department, more on direct labor hours sila. Yung uh, cutting department, gumagamit ng machine. So, dapat machine hours. You get the point. Then we have the assembling department, gumagamit sila ng, let's say, doon sa assembling, gumagamit ulit ng direct labor. And then yung number 4, for example, the finishing, machine naman ulit, kasi for packaging. Then dapat magkakaiba, hindi iisa lang. So ang gagawin, i-departmentalize daw natin sila. Hahatiin natin yung total overhead per department. Okay? And ito nga, yung steps. Divide the company into segments called departments, cost centers to which the expenses are to be charged. Doon natin siya malalaman per department magkano yung nagagastos, and then therefore, pag alam mo na kung magkano yung magagastos, i-charge natin siya dun sa product per department yung charging natin. And syempre, yung department na yun, kanya-kanyang gamit or compute ng rate. Okay? So, ganun lang yun. Napaka-simple. So, in departmentalized company, the factory overhead should be budgeted to each department. The procedures for distributing the budgeted departmental expense are identical to those used to allocate the actual factory overhead expenses. So, prior to the computation of the departmentalized factory overhead rate, the management must make sure that the service departmentalized or service department costs have been allocated to the producing department. Okay? Ito yung ultimately dapat sa kanila na charge. Kasi later, kita natin yung mga support department or yung mga tinatawag nating service department. Yung service department na yun kasi hindi naman natin may charge directly sa product. Kaya ang gagawin muna natin, i-allocate or i-charge muna natin siya sa production department. So, dapat dito. Okay? So, departmentalized overhead rates for the producing departments only. Producing departments, which include the production lines, are the cost accumulation centers in which work is performed directly to the goods being produced. On the other hand, service department, which include such activities such as maintenance, personnel, employee services, and the provision of heat, light, power, and light, are necessary for the entire factory, including the production or including the producing departments to remain in operations. Okay? So, yung mga service or support. Kaya lang, ang problema, itong mga service or support departments, binanggit ko kanina, hindi naman natin ma-allocate directly yung kanilang cost, no, sa products. Kaya ang gagawin, i-allocate natin sila muna or charge muna natin sila sa producing department. Okay? So, typical allocation basis for common costs. So, most common costs can be grouped into 4: labor-related, machine-related, space, and service-related. So, common costs should be analyzed carefully to determine the most appropriate allocation base. Ayan. So, pag labor-related, ito, supervision and personnel, ito yung mga pwedeng gamitin. So, we have number of employees, payroll amount, or direct labor hours. Machine, space, service, related. So, yan lang. Basahin nyo na lang yan. Next, ito na. Ito na yung next topic actually, pero should we go for another video? No, tuloy na lang natin. Okay. So, methods of allocating service department cost to producing department. We have direct method, most widely used method. This method ignores any service rendered by one service department to another, and it allocates each service department's cost or total cost directly to the producing department. So, ito, example. Halimbawa lang ganito, para medyo maintindihan nyo the difference between service department and producing department. Halimbawa, University of Luzon. So, paano siya mag-charge ng overhead? So, syempre, kung mag-charge siya ng overhead, pwedeng gawin niya divide niya lang niya by the number of colleges. Kaya lang, problema, may mga colleges na ang daming course, pero isa lang yung nag-handle. For example, we have the College of Business Administration. May business ad sila, may HRM sila, and tourism. So, kung ang gagawin natin is divide lang natin yung overhead based on the known colleges, then parang it might be, sabihin na natin, unfair kasi yung charging sa kanila as one, pero tatlo silang college. Do you get the point? Okay, so ang gagawin, departmentalize natin sila. So, i-charge natin per colleges. Yan, yung gagawin. Yun yung i-charge natin or gagamitin natin na computation ng cost natin, which is one of the things na i-charge natin dun sa tuition revenue. No? Para ma-determine natin kung kumita ba si UL. Hindi. Kaya lang, may mga department kasi tayo na hindi naman yung pwedeng ma-charge sa mga students niya kasi wala naman silang students. Like for example, we have the maintenance, we have the personnel department, we have the computer department, we have the chapel, we have the cashier, di ba? Yung mga yun, service department yun, na wala silang pwedeng pag-charge. Only, they can only accumulate costs. So, anong gagawin natin? Since hindi natin ma-charge, pero necessary ba sila to operate as university? The answer is yes. So, anong gagawin natin? Para ma-charge natin or ma-isingil natin yan as part of the tuition fee, ito, i-charge muna natin sa producing department. Ganun yan. So, for example, ito HR and this is the maintenance. Okay. Kung ano yung services or support na na-provide niya for producing department, hatiin nila. Same with this one. Okay. Although, halimbawa, sa maintenance, nagbibigay siya ng service kay HR, HR department, naglilinis siya, hindi siya mag-charge dito ng services niya or cost niya. Dito lang sa producing department. That is under what? Under direct. Okay? Walang ina-acknowledge na back services or services to other service department. Then we have the step method. Ito naman, sometimes called a sequential method. Almost the same, pero sasabihin niyo lang kung alin yung mauna. So this method, another thing is it recognizes services rendered by service department to the other service department. And it's more complicated because it requires a sequence of allocation. Sino yung unang i-charge? Di ba nabanggit ko kanina, si maintenance nagbibigay din ng support kay HR department. So dito, magkakaroon ng charging si maintenance kay HR, for example. Okay. So yun yung tinutukoy niya na recognizing the services rendered. So the sequence typically starts with the department that renders the service to the greatest number of other service department. So, ibig sabihin, kung sino yung pinakamaraming nabigyan ng services, na pagbigyan ng services sa ibang service department. Okay? And ends with the department that renders services to the least number of departments. So, mag-e-end doon sa pinaka-konti yung na-servicean yung service department. So, once the service department costs are allocated, no subsequent service department costs are allocated to it. Okay. So, for example, dito, binaliktad niya dito. Ito si maintenance. Okay. Tapos ito si HR department. Morning po. Okay. So, ang gagawin, halimbawa si maintenance daw po ay siya yung pinakamaraming services na provide. So, gagawin niya, siya yung unang i-allocate. So, allocate siya dito kay producing department A, B. Tapos meron din siyang may arrow, makikita niyo may arrow papunta dito. Okay? Halimbawa, yan yung HR. Tapos pagkatapos nun, ito, yung cost niya plus yung service department cost na na-charge sa kanya, yun yung i-allocate naman niya kay producing department. Okay. Ang tanong, sir, paano yan? Di ba si HR department, for example, also provide services kay maintenance by providing, syempre, yung mga employees na ipapasok niya, questions regarding sa sahod and so on and so forth. May back services, pero may arrow ba? Wala. Kasi dito sa step method, pag once na na-i-allocate na, wala nang balikan or walang recognition ng back service. Okay? So, kung gusto mo nang may recognition ng back service, ang gagamitin na natin ay algebraic method, or also known as the reciprocal method. Bakit? Kasi nagre-recognize siya ulit ng services o mutual services ng department. Kaya makikita nyo dito, merong arrow. Okay. Kaya lang ang question dito, pag ganyan yung nangyari, malalagyan ulit ito ng amounts na i-allocate niya ulit. Na kung saan ito magkakaroon ulit ng amount na i-allocate. So, mahaba computation to ng mano-mano. So, instead of mano-mano yung gagawin natin, which is ma-explain ko mamaya, mag-algebraic method na po tayo dyan. Okay? So, let's have the illustrative problem for it. So, sabi natin to. Let's have another. Nice. So, check natin. We have kappa gamma. Okay, check ko lang kung nagre-record pa. Okay, recording pa tayo. So, going back, we have kappa gamma company. Factory is divided into 4 departments. We have producing department, molding and decorating. And then we have the service departments, building and grounds, and the factory administration building. Service department ang dalawa. So building and ground costs will be allocated using the square feet or floor area, and the factory administration will be allocated using direct labor hours. So in computing the predetermined overhead rates, the machine hours are used as base for molding and direct labor hours for decorating. So ano magiging itsura? Okay. So sa akin, para mas madali, I usually prepare like this. Lagi ko dito, service department. Service department. Para mas madali. I don't know. Depende na lang sa inyo. So yung service department natin, dalawa. We have building and the grounds. And then dito sa kabila, we have factory administration building. So check that. Next, we have the producing department. Molding and decorating. Molding and decorating. Yan. So, ba't ganyan yung mas gusto ko? Kasi mas madali siya. Yan. So, we have the budgeted factory overhead here. Magkano? We have 80,000 and 120. And 400,000 and 600,000. Okay. So, allocate natin daw siya using direct method, step, and then algebraic method. Okay. So, let's start with direct method. So, direct method muna tayo. Direct method. So, sabi niya, allocate lang natin kung magkano. So, first one to be allocated. Allocate natin si building and grounds. Okay, so paano natin allocate si building and grounds? Sabi niya, the building and grounds is allocated using the square feet. So, ilan yung square feet na or the floor area? Okay, we have floor area of 160,000. Do we need to consider itong 2 and 4? Hindi. Yung sa producing department lang. So, we have 160,000 So, sa molding, we have 100,000. Yeah. Then decorating, 60,000. So, ang gagawin mo lang, 100,000 divided by the total, 160,000. For the decorating, you have 16,000 divided by 160. Ganyan yung magiging computations lang. Okay. So, this one is minus 80,000. So, minus 80,000. So, paano mo again i-allocate? Madali lang. So, kung yan ay minus 80,000, paano natin siya i-allocate? That's 100 over 80. So, kung ano yung minus mo, i-add mo siya dito. Ibig yun yung charging natin. So, this one is 80,000 times 100 over 160. Yun lang. So, this is 50,000. This one is 80,000 times 60 over 160. 30. Yan lang. So, yun yung first. Then, get the balance. So, ito ay syempre 0. Kunin mo natin sa times. So, we have 0, 120, and 550. Okay, next. Number 2, allocate factory admin. Ano makaabot? So, magkano si factory admin? 120,000. This is minus 120. So, paano natin siya allocate? Factory admin daw po will be allocated using direct labor hours. So, direct labor hours is 200 and 100. 200 and 100. So, kung ayaw mo na ganyan, sulat mo na lang 200. And then this one sa decorating 100. So, para alam mo kung anong basis mo lang. So, this one should be 120,000 times 200,000 over the total nilang dalawa, 300,000. Yan lang. Okay. Next one is 120 times 100,000 over 300,000. Yan lang. 40. Tapos na. That's direct method. Get the balance. We have the sum of following. So, ito na yung allocated. Yan yung total. Okay. So, ito na ngayon yung kukumpitan mo ng rates, ng departmental rates. Sabi niya, the molding department, baliktad yata. And computing the predetermined machine hours, yes. Ayan. And direct labor. So, machine hours, ilan yung machine hours sa molding department? $200,000. Tapos, kay decorating daw po is direct labor hours. Ilan? Direct labor hours. Check nito. 100,000. So, yung magiging departmental rate nila, simple lang. This is 500,000 divided by 200. 265. And this one is 670 times 030. Y. Ako lang mababa. So, yun, 6.7. So, this one is 2.65 per machine hours. And this one is per direct labor hours. Yan yung magiging allocation. Okay? So, yun yung direct method. Next, gawin naman natin yung step method. So, step method tayo. Or sequential method. Look, sabi niya, start with building and grounds. So, yung 80,000 mo daw should be allocated to step method, meron na tayong recognition na done or services done to other service department. So, dito, makikita natin na inallocate natin yung building and grounds using square feet. So, floor area. So, we have 100 for the molding. 100 molding. For the decorating, meron tayo 60,000. And for the factory admin, meron tayong 4,000. 164. So, ano gagawin natin? Mag-allocate tayo. So, paano yun? Pag-addin mo lang, 100 plus 60 plus 4, that's 164,000. So, yung molding will be given 80,000 times 100,000 over 164,000. Okay? Next, ito is 80,000 times 60,000 over 164,000. And lastly, si factory admin will have 80,000 times 4,000 over 164. Okay. Pag pinag-add mo yan, that's 80,000. Okay, let's get the balance. Sorry. So, 0 na si building and grounds. And this time, yung factory admin mo, dalawa na yun naman. Meron na siyang allocation coming from the building and grounds. Okay. So, number 2, allocate factory. Okay. So, this is minus 121. 121. 121,951. Hindi ko kasi mabasa. Okay. So, yung next na i-allocate natin, paano daw siya ulit i-allocate? Ito na, copy na natin. 200 and 100 using machine hours. Direct labor hours. 200 and 100. So, copy na natin yan. Same na naman. So, 200 and 100. So, this is 121,951.22 times 200,000 over 300,000. And then we have 121,951.22 times 100,000 over 300. Tapos na. The sum. The balance. Makikita nyo na 0 na din. Okay? So, 530, 60. So, anong gagawin natin ulit dito? Okay. So, kunin mo lang yung kanilang rate. So, divide lang natin to. So, this is divided by this. Oh, nagkataon lang na the same. 2.65 lang. 530, 20. Oh, kasi konti lang. Pero, ayan, para makita lang natin yung difference. Ayan. So, merong 0.4. Malit lang kasi. Kaya hindi masyadong makita yung pagkakaiba. So, divided by 30, 31. 6.70. So, same. Malit lang naman yung changes. Pero it's actually 6.6992. So, yeah. Malit lang naman kasi yung difference nung sinunod. So, mas makikita niyo yan kapag tatlong department yung ginawa. Okay? So, next. Pinakamahirap na guys is yung algebraic method. Bakit? Pwede ba natin computein yun ng ganito? Hindi. Kasi bakit? Imagine this one. Pag inallocate natin yung factory building, factory admin building using direct labor hours, we have direct labor hours here. Wala. Yes. Direct labor hours. Wala. So, hindi siya ma-allocate dito. Okay? So, gagawan pa ba? Hindi natin siya magagawa. Wala. Dapat meron. Direct labor hours. So, wala siyang direct labor hours. So, di natin siya magagawan. I-end ko muna yung ating video for this time. Hanggang dyan lang muna. Step method. Gagawa tayo na kasi kailangan mag-allocate. Pag sinabing reciprocal method kasi, pag nag-allocate tayo ng factory admin, bibigyan din natin ulit si building and grounds. So, ibig sabihin, pag nalagyan ulit si building and grounds, allocate mo ulit si building and grounds na malalagyan ulit si factory admin. Okay? Pag ganun ang nangyari, ano ulit ang mangyayari? Malalagyan ulit si factory admin na kung saan lalagyan mo or kukumpitan mo ulit si building and grounds. So that will be a problem. So, gagawin natin doon, kikreate na lang po tayo ng so call this one. Create na lang tayo doon ng algebraic equation. Okay. So, try natin. Sulit na. Okay. So, I-take na ka-unpost. Yeah. So, this is the additional information para makapag-prepare tayo na algebraic method. Okay. Algebraic method. So, magkakaroon tayo na additional info such as the services provided by the building and the grounds and then yung factory admin. Bakit? Kapag wala ito, hindi tayo makakapag-prepare kasi. Okay. So, dito, yung binanggit ko kasi kanina, nagre-recognize to ng back service. So, kapag gagamitin natin itong computation na to, matatagalan tayo. Okay? Sobrang matatagalan tayo. So, gagawin natin, compute tayo nung cost, nung total cost nung building and grounds. Okay? Na may inclusion na ng back services from the factory admin. The same with factory admin, may inclusions na ng building and grounds. So, compute natin. Magkano ba yung building and grounds? So, building and grounds, cost niya is equal to for 80,000 plus ilan yung FA. Okay, so makikita nyo dito yung FA, provided services, 10% ng cost niya kay building and grounds. So, lalagyan natin 10% of FA. Yan. Tapos we have FA ngayon is equal to 120,000 plus ilan yung services provided ng BNG sa kanya? 20%. So, 20% of BG. 20% of BG. So, kapag meron na tayong ganyan, pwede na ba tayong mag-compute ng algebra? Yes. Okay? So, ang gagawin lang natin, substitution. Substitution. So, we have BNG. So, BNG or BG na lang is equal to 80,000 plus 10% of FA. Ngayon, alam mo na ba yung FA? Yes. That's FA is 120,000 plus 20% of 20% of BG. Yan. Pwede na pala. So, gawin lang natin distribution. So, BG is equal to 80,000 plus anong 10% ng 120,000? That's 12,000 plus 10% ng 20% ng BG. So, plus 12,000 plus yung 10% ng 20%. So, kumputin natin. 10%. So, that's 0.1 times 0.2. We have 0.02 plus 0.02 of the BG. Okay na. So, anong gagawin natin? Combine similar terms. So, mangyari, ito lilipat to doon. So, BG minus 0.02 BG is equal to 92,000. Madali na? Yes. So, 0.02 magiging 0.98 BG is equal to 92,000. Okay. Gagawin lang natin. Divide both sides by 0.98. BG is equal to 92,000 divided by 0.98. Magkano yan? Times 0.98. Ay, divided by, hindi times. Divided by, sorry. So, BG is equal to 93,877.55. Okay, yan na. Next. Susunod. Substitute na natin yung value ng BG dun sa FA. So, FA now is equal to 120,000 plus 20% of BG, which is 93,877.55. Yan na. So, multiply lang natin. This is times 0.10. So, FA is equal to 120,000 plus magkano na yan? 18,775. 775.50. So, FA now is equal to plus ay nasa taas L54 130 sulat na nito 138,775. Ayan na. Ano yung sagot? Okay. So, anong gagawin natin? Yan na yung i-allocate natin na cost nila. So, copy na natin to. Pwede na natin copy yan ng buo. Ganito siya. Pag nakuha mo na yan, allocate mo siya using direct method. So, yung algebraic method, once na complete mo yung kailangan natin i-allocate mo siya using direct method. Parang direct method. So, this one, instead of 80,000 yung i-allocate mo na building and grounds, ang allocate mo dyan is minus 93,877.55. So, meron tayong negative 13 dito. Ano ba? Ay, hindi. Ano ba? Algebraic. Hindi direct method. Allocate mo siya using kasi may back service. Itong gagamitin. Pero may twist kasi i-allocate pa natin. Kasi i-allocate natin. Yes. Sorry. Copy ko to. Allocate natin siya na parang direct method pero hindi ganyan. Okay? Doon tayo sa additional information. Kalimutan. Services provided. So, we have 50, 30, and 10. So, instead of 80, going back, This is minus 93,877.55. Yan. So, paano natin siya allocate? Using this one. Yung BNG, may molding, decorating, and FA. So, copy natin to. Except for the BG, syempre. Allocate natin na X. This is 50. This is 30%. This is 20%. Ayan yung tinutukoy ko na parang direct method. Kasi multiply mo siya based on the percentage na. So, FA will have, huwag natin copy natin. It's 93,877.55 times 0.20. Next, si molding will have 93,877.55 times 0.50. And then sa decorating will have 93,877.55 times 30% or 0.30. Yan na. Pwede natin peso sign. And then get the balance. Check na to. So, i-allocate nyo siya na parang direct method, pero not necessarily yung direct method sa taas. Okay? Yung paano siya nagbigay ng services. Okay. So, number 2, allocate factory out. Okay. So, paano yun? Ito siya. 40, 50. 40, 52. This is 40. This is 50. This is 10. So, si factory admin, this is minus 138. 775.50. Copy na lang natin. Okay. So, si molding will have 40% niya. So, we have 138,775.51 times 0.40. This is 50%. This is 138,775.51 times 50%. And lastly, ito 10%. This is 138,775.51 times 10%. So, na-magicin na lang natin yun. Hindi, joke. Pinasa-sign natin siya. Yan. So, makikita nyo, magbabalance siya. So, balance is ito sa taas. Makikita nyo na 0 na yan. See? Na-allocate na ba sila? Yes. So, ito na yung magiging total overhead cost ng producing department. And i-divide na lang natin siya using this one. These informations. So we have N69. Oh, okay. Okay. So I think that's all. Hindi siya direct method. This is algebraic method. Pero i-allocate mo siya directly kung paano na-compute yung addition based on the additional information. Okay. Dito. Ilagay natin ng content para may distinction. Okay. So, I think that will be all for today. The remainder po is for ano na lang, for your own reading na lang. Okay. So, should there be any questions na lang po, guys, doon na lang po sa GC. Thank you so much. See you when I see you.